Well, hello everyone. This is Suzi Craig from Mental Health Connecticut, and today I am joined with Brandon Nappi from Copper Beech Institute, and we're going to be talking about the intersection of spirituality and mental health and what that can look like on your mental health journey. Copper Beech is a wonderful place that I've been to personally and have worked with in the past. They are 100% focused on mindfulness and the exploration of what that can mean for your personal journey. And they have a lot of great virtual offerings, which we'll put in the blog post and share with you. But the first one and the main one to know about is their daily free online meditations, which is really wonderful. So with that, we're going to start talking with Brandon Nappi and welcome him to the conversation. So welcome, Brandon.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. My family's history includes really creative exploration in spiritual practice for many different organized religions and native religious practice and experimentation, and a long history of mental health struggle and challenge and stories of heartache and resilience as well. So these two themes coming together are really near and dear to my heart.
Oh, that's good to know. And you're no stranger to theology, right? So I think when some people think of mindfulness, they might think of certain specific Eastern practices or just the general idea of mindfulness. But your background is really steeped in, religious practices as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I was studying to be a priest a Catholic priest, before I met my wife and had my family. And so, from a young age, the spiritual life was something I was really, really interested in. How can we as humans live our deepest, fullest life? How can we reach our fullest potential? And as the famous prayer of St. Francis would say, how can we be instruments of peace for our world? How can we be a channel of love and compassion? And even from my adolescent days, I knew that I wanted somehow to give my life and to give my heart to supporting others in their spiritual quest. And after leaving seminary, I went to Yale Divinity School and widened my circle, studying with Christians from many, many different denominations, and really found my mind expanding as I learned that there were so many different ways of walking the Christian path. And then later on in life, really found myself moved by Buddhism, by Zen practice, by meditation, and did my doctoral research in Christian Zen dialogue and how meditation practice can be particularly supportive to Christians, but universally supportive to all people. And then did work at University of Massachusetts Medical School Center for Mindfulness, where I really came to understand that science and spirituality were not opposite categories. That there were a lot of people really curious about how spiritual practice could be in some way measured, that really serious scientists didn't necessarily need to abandon spiritual practice, and really serious spiritual practitioners didn't have to feel like they were in a battle with modern science. And so I felt like it was this kind of healing and unification of two elements of my life that I really loved. And so, the last 20 years have been quite a roller coaster as I've come to explore more and more spiritual traditions and see the real beauty in the countless number of spiritual traditions that are now accessible for folks to try on for size and to taste.
Well, that's a powerful revelation, and it's interesting. It makes me think of the mental health world, where there's this very extensive and deeply rooted clinical side of things, which is, the science around how we treat, address, mental health challenges. And then there's more of the, I guess, quote unquote, art side of things, where there are wellness practices in the recovery mental health journey, which is very much what Mental Health Connecticut is focused on. Art, gardening, mindfulness, writing, all of those practices are ones that we're trying to elevate, because what we found is when someone takes on one of those pathways, the ones that really speak to them, it becomes a ripple effect for them to take on their own health and wellness. And that's one of the main reasons we wanted to talk to you, because as part of our 31 days of wellness, we're exploring a multitude of different pathways to get at your mental health challenges. Nutrition, like I said, regarding other ways that can be beneficial. And it's not like it's replacing one thing for another, right? It's just finding your way in, like you were talking about with your own journey. It's like just finding your way in. So you mentioned personal experiences in your family with mental health challenges. How do you see that intersection of taking on a spiritual practice actively impacting someone's mental health?
Yeah, it's been really fascinating to watch the way in which mental health practitioners are now at the cutting edge of welcoming spiritual practice into mental health. Because, of course, if we look historically, this was not always the case. Freud thought that religion and spirituality were a neurosis, right? And so for the first half of the 20th century, we have a real divide between the mental health community and the spiritual community. This healing begins to through the work of Jung, and then you fast forward to our moment, and some of the folks who are at on the front lines of delivering spiritual practice are ironically not religious leaders often. I think they're mental health professionals who are opening the doors for their clients so that they can resource themselves through a spiritual practice. I mean, moments like this in the middle of a pandemic really call for an anchor, a way to ground us, a way to ease and soothe and heal. And what many mental health professionals have come to understand is that spiritual practice is part of the constellation of factors that we need to be cultivated, right? Spiritual practice is one aspect of a healthy life. So, yeah, I think one of the primary ways that in my own life and what I've observed in my family is that mindfulness practice, which we teach and live at Copper Beech, really helps us to work through the various sort of mood challenges that sometimes we find ourselves in. Depression, anxiety, stress, to really help us move through some really uncomfortable emotions. And what we're working on in mindfulness is really increasing our window of tolerance, right? So that while at first we might have a particular emotion and feeling, and find it so unpleasant that we have to run to a distraction, or to a medication, or to a drug of some kind. What we begin to do is we make peace with our experience, and we widen the ability to sit with what is sometimes uncomfortable and really unpleasant. And so that we can, the way we often talk about it at Copper Beech Institute is that we can learn ways of responding rather than reacting. So that we can find really skillful or wise ways of responding to some mental health challenges. So that's been a really important piece of my journey. I mean, I've been really supported by some deep mental health practitioners who've also been mindfulness teachers and therapists, psychologists, social workers who, in some ways, were my great spiritual teachers. So in my own life and practice, I've been so lucky and blessed that these two wisdom traditions, that of mental health and psychology and spirituality, have been intertwined in single people who showed up at exactly the right moment and blended the wisdom from both of these traditions in a way that, frankly, just saved my life. I don't know that I would be here. Certainly Copper Beech Institute wouldn't be here if some beautiful souls hadn't showed up and showed me how both spiritual and mental health are kind of two wings that allow the soul to soar, right? If you just have one, you fly in circles.
Yeah, for sure. I love what you're saying about the distinctions around responding and reacting, and it's making me realize that we have a lot of modalities and different ways that we work with our program participants here. It's good to know we're on the right track because we do a lot of that work here. But I also love the idea that you were talking about, and I don't think you used these words specifically, but mindfulness and the way of being and sitting with a difficult challenge is really a muscle to exercise, right? It's like, at least I get the sense of when you're talking about it, like the more you do it, the more it, starts to feel like you're taking a little more semblance of control over maybe not the situation itself, but like how you are in that place, I think it's really helpful for people to hear that's possible.
Oh my gosh, we always say when you can't control a situation, what you can always control is your response to it, right? The pandemic has come to teach us this, right?
Absolutely.
To be able to find the space for choice in the midst of complete powerlessness, right? So that's been really, really important. And we need practices to help us through this. It's not just enough to imagine the life we want, or to imagine the quality of well-being in which we're peaceful and welcoming love and calm at every moment. It's not just enough to imagine that that's true or want it to be true. I think the great spiritual insight that we've received from millennia, and every single spiritual tradition and religion teaches this, is we need to practice our way into healing, right? That we need some kind of steadfast, regular practices that we move through again and again to nurture our spirit. I mean, the word spirituality itself just comes from the Latin word spiritus, which means breath. Of course, it's no great surprise that so many spiritual traditions use the breath somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And so just as the breath is essential for my own fullness of life and health, spiritual practice is essential for my wanting to live wholeheartedly, or living with purpose, however we name this, living up to my full potential. There's this great early Christian theologian who would say, the glory of God is simply the human being fully alive. And that's all spiritual practice is. Its practice is to support our fullness of life. And I think many of us move through life realizing that maybe I'm not always showing up with my best self. Maybe I didn't respond in that moment as gracefully or compassionately as I could have. Maybe I'm my toughest critic, and I'm making life actually most difficult for myself. And I'm compassionate to others, but I'm cruel to myself. And gosh, I could be living more fully and more wholeheartedly if I could heal some of that. And of course, the great the spiritual insight is that we practice our way into that kind of wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
So to be in this moment right now is one filled with a lot of excitement and opportunity for all the hardship that we're experiencing in the pandemic, because we have now, in this unprecedented moment in history, spiritual practices and resources that 100 years ago you would have to go into a monastery on the top of a hill to an ashram in India and seek them out. They were locked away behind closed doors. And it's really only in the last generation or two that we have access to these healing modalities that we can experiment with and see if they work for us.
I think that's really amazing. And we can start wrapping this up. I just want to thank you so much for your time, but I know what I'm going to take away is practice your way into healing, which I just love that. Like I can almost viscerally feel like if I'm just even thinking about whatever spiritual practice I take on, and obviously, everyone's path will be different. So, but I think the idea is to actively seek out that practice, and in doing so, you could find your way to healing. And I just think it's a beautiful way to spend our time, like you said, throughout this terrible crisis. So I highly recommend everyone checking out Copper Beech's daily meditation. We'll make sure, you can have access to the website open to everyone for free, which is amazing. And like you and I talked about earlier, making this accessible now brings in people from all over the world so you can, come together, which I think is just beautiful. So any last thoughts before we wrap up, Brandon?
Thank you. Just this is my deep, deep conviction that each of us has within us this near infinite reservoir of compassion and love and healing. And the work of the spiritual life is just to wake up to what's already there. You don't have to go to some far off land. In one sense, you actually don't have to do a single thing. You just need to wake up to who you already are and realize that this reservoir of peace and healing and love is within you. And that's why we exist at Copper Beech Institute. And I'm so thankful that you're bringing this really important topic forward for discussion, because our world needs healing now more than ever. So thank you, Suzi. It means so much to us.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with all this virtual mindfulness and meditating. I'm sure you're super busy, so I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
It's a joy. I hope our paths cross soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.